Good morning. It is Tuesday, July the 4th. And to get an idea of where we are in the traditional calendar, in the 43 Missal, it is July the 4th, and the note is within the octave of the Holy Apostles Peter and Paul, semi-double red vestments. And so what has the primacy here, and for centuries had the primacy on this day, it was an undedicated day, or it was an open day, if you will, within the octave. In the 62, it's also open, meaning that you would refer to it's a feria day. You could refer back to the Sunday, or the priest has the latitude to do a commemorative or votive mass of his option, usually a Mass of Our Lady. Within the octave of Saints Peter and Paul, you have dedicated readings from the introit. To me, thy friends, O God, are made exceedingly honorable. Their principality is exceedingly strengthened. Lord, thou hast proved me and known me. Thou hast known my sitting and my rising. Glory to the Father, etc. And then from the Collect, O God, who has consecrated this day to the martyrdom of thine apostles, Peter and Paul, vouchsafe that thy church may in all things obey the commandments of those through whom the beginning she received faith through our Lord. I'm not going to go further into the Mass. I wanted to talk some about the significance of this day in American history. But suffice it to say that you have an instance here where St. Peter and Paul, there's open persecution of the Catholic Church. They, in fact, will be martyred for the faith, but nowhere do they advocate revolution against the Roman government. Christ himself is often called, especially by our Protestant brethren, he's often called a revolutionary. And he wasn't. He made the statement more than once, every letter of the law shall be obeyed, you have to submit to authority, etc., etc. The point is, revolution is not a Catholic concept. The United States of America is not a Catholic country. And we do well to remember our Catholic history when we look back. So let's talk about that for just a moment, the Catholic history of this country. We often think that the history of America starts in 1776 with the Declaration of Independence, and we do well because we celebrate this day as the Declaration of Independence, the signing of a document which rebelled against a coronated king in England. The point being is that the first Catholics, the very first Catholic Mass, was on Clement Island in Maryland, and this expedition was done at the request and under the support of Lord Baltimore. In 1634, on March the 25th, the Annunciation. In 1634, almost 150 years before the Declaration of Independence, and only 14 years after the first colonists arrived, there was two ships, the Ark and the Dove, which sailed from the Isle of Wight, and they were a 4-month sail. And so they had left with the new year, or shortly after the new year, and then they arrived on March the 25th. You got to think what a bitter crossing that was across the Atlantic to navigate and to come up Chesapeake Bay to Clement Island. And Clement Island is a high spot. It lies some 25, 30-foot elevation above the Chesapeake Bay. They make landfall on the Annunciation. You can't discount the providence there. They named the island in honor of Pope Clement I, who was the patron saint of mariners. If you recall the story of his martyrdom, he's the fourth pope. He wrote quite prolifically. It was a very instrumental pope in the early church. He was tied to an anchor and plunged into the sea until he drowned. But the story is that he preached for quite a bit of time before he expired, even underwater. And the symbol of the anchor is a symbol of his sainthood, but he was their patron. It's about an 80-acre island, and it was granted by Lord Baltimore to Thomas Girard. And Girard becomes a major landholder and political figure in Maryland and Virginia. However, because he's Catholic, at the time of the Revolution, he and his family are going to be disallowed to be involved in politics. and this brings up a subject that really want to bring forward, is that Catholics were denied. There was open persecution against Catholics, and there have been open persecution against Catholics in this country for quite a while. It is not as prevalent on the national scene, and in fact, there's been many attempts to claim a Catholic identity. We see it currently among our president and past speaker and others who are openly doing things that are inconsistent with the Catholic faith, and we've only got a few prelates who are brave enough to stand up and say, you can't do that. As we look at history, it's a hodgepodge, and if you would like talk on Catholic history in the United States and ongoing within the world and politics, etc., that may be a subject to broach at another time. However, suffice it to say that I wanted to bring out a couple of points for us to contemplate on this day, is that the United States is not a Catholic country, and participation by Catholics in the formation of the country was very much discouraged, if not openly discriminated against. They were relegated to Maryland, and surrounding areas, the site of St. Clement Island being the first of those masses in what would be the colonies. And if you wanted to summarize the situation of the Catholic Church in the 13 colonies, it's characterized by an extensive religious persecution originating from the Protestant sects, which openly relegated and confined Catholicism to certain geographical areas. American anti-Catholicism has its origins in the Reformation and the Counter-Reformation. We'll speak to one of the heroes of the Counter-Reformation tomorrow. But the British colonists were predominantly Protestant, and they opposed not only the Roman Catholic Church, but also the Church of England, which they believed perpetuated some Catholic doctrine and practices. For that reason, they deemed it to be insufficiently reformed, and Protestants discontented with the Church of England formed the earliest religious settlements in North America. One of the Catholic authors wrote that a universal anti-Catholic bias was brought to Jamestown in 1607 and vigorously cultivated in all 13 colonies from Massachusetts to Georgia, with only parts of Maryland Catholicism being allowed. Incidentally, it was some of the least desirable areas for colonization. When you go through and read this history, it's very clear all the way up through the 1800s with the no-name party and the open persecution of Catholics in the East in the 1870s and 80s, so much so that Father McGivney forms the Knights of Columbus as literally an armed protective force in the Catholic neighborhoods. What fostered a lot of this was the English Protestantism, but also the Freemasonry was very much at the heart of the persecution of the Catholic Church. They were very afraid of the Catholic Church. If Catholics had banded together as Catholics, they would have been a very formidable force. But Freemasonry was very effective in doing something here, even though all the language from melting pots and assimilation, they were very much promoting the fragmentation of the Catholic populace according to ethnicities. And so this is one of the reasons Polish parish and Irish parish, Italian parish, etc. Now remember, all the Mass at this time was all the traditional Mass. It was all the Latin Mass. But in an effort to keep the ethnicities fragmented and at bay and divided so that there was not a monolithic response to government, this is what they did. You see this now happening. This strategy is still being used, not necessarily with Catholics, but with special interest groups, with the redefinition of race. Incidentally, for a Catholic, there is one race, and it's the human race. There may be different colors and ethnicities, but we are one humanity. But the government currently is very effective in fragmenting. I would urge you today, on Independence Day, this anniversary of the rebellion of the Protestant Freemasonry leadership of this country, to go back and to read some Catholic accounts and to read a little bit, because the Freemason history that we learned in public school is not going to tell this story of Catholic persecution. And remember that the Mass was here 150 years before the Declaration of 1776. For all of the pride if you will, in this country. And I'm not to say that we should not pray for the land of our birth and that we should intercede, because providence has deigned that we either were immigrated here or we were born here. And in this last century, starting in the late 1800s and into the 1900s, this country has provided, not intentionally, a refuge for Catholics. I think that of all the dark things that have happened in the name of the faith and to the faith in this country, we do well to have a sober look, and we do well together as Catholics to preserve the faith and the faithful. And so on this day, let's make an effort to regain the Catholic history, especially that Catholic history that started on Clement Island in 1634 on the Feast of the Annunciation, when the first Mass was offered. Let's go back and look at some of these sources. Do that on your own. The reading is rich. The information is rich. If you'd like to have a series of talks on Catholicism in the United States or church history, that may be a subject for a later series of talks. I'd also like to bring to mind some very interesting things, and that is there are 3 presidents, Adams, Jefferson, and Monroe, that died on this day. So 3 of the signers of the Declaration, 2 of them, Thomas Jefferson and John Adams, died independently on July 4th, 1826, and that's the 50th anniversary. The odds of that are absolutely amazing. Some have opined that there is a diabolical element or an exacting of a deal. But it's very interesting that 3 of these presidents, 3 of these signers died on that day. There's also very interesting history in the Carroll family, 2 brothers. One is a bishop, the first bishop of the United States. The other is the worshipful master of the Masonic Lodge. So Catholicism and the Masonic Lodge, Catholicism and disunion with Rome, goes way, way back and is still prevalent to where you have modern prelates such as Archbishop Fiorenza advocating that Freemasonry was all right. And then the most recent, and this is the one that is the most egregious, is Theodore McCarrick comes back from Rome, from the Curia, with a directive that in the 1980s that American politicians who support abortion in any form are to be denied communion. And he not only failed to deliver that message, but at the USCCB spoke about inclusion. There have been many dark figures who have militated against Catholicism directly from the inside and from the outside, linked with Freemasonry. It is still among us. So on this Independence Day, may every holy soul, whoever wore the uniform of the United States, whoever served in the military, whoever gave their life, for every Catholic soul who gave their life, their energy to the development of this country or for love of this country, please pray for this country now, that this country yield to right reason and return to God, the return to orthodoxy, that voices, that people be encouraged and enthused to stand up, to speak truth to power, and to restore the ideals of God, faith, family, and the Catholic Church throughout the world.
Salve Regina, Mater misericordiae, vita dulcedo et spes nostra salve. Nate clamamus ex oles filii Eve, nate suspiramus, gementes et flentes, in ad lacrimarum valle. Neia ergo advocata nostra, Deus tuos, misericordes oculos, ad nos converte. non pronavis Sancta Dei Genitris, ut digni efficiamur promissionibus Christi. Oremus, omnipotens sempiterne Deus, qui gloriose Virginis Matris Mariae corpus et anima dignum Filii Tui habitaculum efficimere retur Spiritus Sancto cooperante preparasti, daut cuius commemoratione letamur, eius pia intercessione ab instantibus malis et a morte perpetua liberemur, per eundem Christum Dominum nostrum.